Well, we're sitting here today and very excited to be with Reza Aslan, world-famous theological scholar, best-selling author. One of the reasons we're so excited to talk to you is about the intersection of humor and religion. Sometimes a tenuous intersection.
Right.
We were very pleasantly surprised that there was a lot of humor actually in your series. Sometimes probably intentional, sometimes unintentional. Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience with the ultra-Orthodox group, the Nanoks?
The Nanoks, yeah. The Nanoks are they're basically like ultra-Orthodox ravers, as weird as that sounds. You know, they're mostly young. They wear white instead of the traditional black. They take part in something called hafatza, which is it's a kind of evangelizing. They go around mostly in Israel, and they try to convert secular Jews into the ultra-Orthodox lifestyle, but they do so with music and singing and dancing and like, you know, street parties and, you know, these kinds of, it's like the Haredim version of Chinese fire drills, you know, where they just like, they stop traffic and they all get out of their vans and they bust this kind of techno house music. And, you know, what they're trying to do is basically say that what God wants from you is happiness, right? That's really God's plan. And so they exude this sense of happiness, which is kind of manic, right? Because like, you can't be happy all the time. That's insane behavior, right? But these guys, you know, like you see them and they're just like, yee-haw, woo, all the time. And, you know, some people think that they're crazy. Some people call them cultish. Most people just dismiss them completely as irrelevant. But they themselves they see themselves as sort of the bridge between the traditional kind of staid, ultra-Orthodox, serious, sad, don't laugh at anything, and the secular Jews who feel as though the ultra-Orthodox are transforming their society and their lives for the worse.
Do you think people take them less seriously because of the levity?
I think some people do, yeah. I think some people just sort of see the happiness and the music and the dancing, and they think, well, they're drunk or stoned or whatever, and they sometimes are drunk or stoned, by the way. But I think they just sort of think that they're not important. And there's not that many of them. I think, you know, I said about 1,000. After the show, we had Nanoks contact us and say there's more than 1,000 of us. Yeah, but whatever, let's say a couple of thousand.
Right.
But nevertheless, they're impossible to ignore. That's the thing, is that they're very loud, they're very vocal, they're everywhere.
Your Scientology episode, you sort of went into it acknowledging that Scientology gets a difficult rap. And you know, it probably more than any other religion gets laughed at. It feels like the religion that it's okay for all the late night talk show hosts to have it as a punchline. Why do you think that is?
I'd say one step further. I'd say not only is it okay for it to be a punchline, but that it's the kind of religion where if you defend it in any way, you get mocked and attacked.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that one sort of falls into this different category for people?
Well, I think that there's a sort of philosophical reason and then a very kind of just sort of naturalistic reason, which is that, you know, it's mired in scandal, it's mired in corruption and abuse. You know, it involves celebrities, so of course there's the voyeuristic aspect of it. It's very secretive and closed off, and the church itself doesn't help situations because they act sometimes in a sort of comical fashion when responding to criticism of any kind. So they kind of bring it on themselves. The church brings it on itself a little bit. But I think in a more sort of philosophical way, because it's new. That's why. I mean, you know, I always sort of remind people that Mormonism is only 150 years old. That we actually, like, people dragged the founder of Mormonism out of a prison cell and strung him up, murdered him. We passed laws in America, federal laws, the entire purpose of which was to destroy Mormonism as a religion. So we have polygamy laws in this country now.
Right.
We didn't have polygamy laws before Mormonism. You could marry 4 people if you wanted to. We didn't make polygamy laws in America in order to help sanctify marriage. We did it to destroy a religion. You know, and yet today, Mormonism is a beautiful global religion. You know, it's one of the great religions of the world.
Right.
Despite the fact that, you know, one can say that a lot of its founding ideas and its cosmology and all that stuff is science fiction-y,
Right.
you know? And I think that's the thing with Scientology is that, you know, it's new. And so somehow when confronted with the idea that maybe trillions of years ago, you know, space aliens came here and dropped, you know, imprisoned, you know, thetans in volcanoes, releasing them, you know, and so that they bounce off our bodies, etc. That's weird and crazy. But the idea that the God of heaven and earth took some dirt and blew into it and turned it into a human being, then took a rib from that human being and turned it into another human being, then those two people created all of humanity as we know it, that's okay. Right. That's not as crazy.
Right.
And it's not as crazy because it's 5,000 years old.
Right. It's the passage of time that
exactly.
ensconces these things in our minds.
They're both science fiction.
Right.
It's just one's older.
Your Hawaii episode with
Jesus with a Z.
Jesus with a Z. Do we call him a doomsday cult figure? I want to respectfully refer to him
like
as
it's, you know, cult is such a loaded word.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, he's a doomsday prophet.
Doomsday prophet.
Yeah, he's a doomsday prophet. He's got a vision for the end of the world.
So this was
which, by the way, involves flooding.
Right.
And he lives in Hawaii.
Right.
Which is not a good idea.
Terrible place to be.
Wyoming,
Exactly.
Wyoming or something. Like,
but he's building an ark. He and his people are
they're
building an ark.
They're building an ark.
Now that
and a series of arcs, just to be clear,
right.
Not just one arc. It's a series of. He calls it the Armada.
The Armada, excellent. So that was definitely one of the lighter episodes, yeah. And he's a character. He's funny. Some of the stuff they do is funny, but again, like you say, it's in the eye of the beholder. You walked a great, interesting line in that episode at kind of laughing with it, but yet still being respectful. How was your decision in that to
this works.
manage it?
You're talking about religion.
Right.
I mean, it's people tend to take that kind of seriously. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, they kind of take it sort of seriously. And also, not just that, but you're talking about religions, in our case, that tend to already be somewhat insular and secretive and, you know, distrusting of media. And the only way that I can show up with a camera crew and say, let me be a part of this, is to make a very clear agreement, which is, let me in and I will do what you say. I'll do what you want me to do. I'll be a part of you. I'm not here to make fun of you. I'm not here to judge you. And it's sort of it's a deal that we have. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to be honest or critical. You know, there are times when I'm very clear, like, I don't feel good about this at all. I don't want to do this anymore. And there are times when I'll just be like, well, that was nuts.
Right.
But I think that there's a difference between sort of being open, which is what I am, and being uncritical, which is what I'm not. And I think that recognizing, because the show is called Believer, this is about these people and what they believe. And people believe things for a whole host of reasons. And so, you know, I'm gonna be open and respectful to those beliefs, to the believers, even if I am distrusting or critical of the beliefs themselves.
Looking now beyond the show and looking back into history, picking your expert brain, in the ancient text, the revered, the Bible, and the Quran, is there humor found in any of those places?
There are, but the thing is that because we're removed from the context of the time, we don't get the humor.
It's like Shakespeare. It's like Shakespeare isn't funny necessarily
Yeah.
to a common eye or ear.
Right, except that when you study, if you study Shakespeare, you often study his time and place.
Right.
When you talk about the Bible, you're usually in church or whatever, and nobody talks about the context. Nobody says Jesus is speaking to a specific audience. This is who that audience is, and this is what that audience is concerned with, and this is what Jesus is saying to them. On the contrary, the point is that Jesus' words are eternal. They're without context. Jesus isn't talking to an audience. He's talking to you right now.
Right.
And that's a beautiful spiritual message, but it misses, the
reality.
context, the reality of it. And, even, what I always say, there's this amazing joke that Jesus makes in one of the Gospels, I believe it's Matthew, in which he heals a leper, right? He heals a leper, and then he says, go and show the priests and do what they've asked you to do in order to be healed. And we read that and we're like, wow, what an amazingly spiritual story, because Jesus healed him for nothing, just healed him. And then weirdly he says, go and show yourself to the priest and do what's required of, in order to be healed. Well, what's required in order to be healed is this outrageously hilarious 2-week-long process that involves like killing an ox and a goat, covering yourself in the goat's blood, and then coming back the next day and then covering yourself in the ox blood, and then you have to get some herbs, and then you got to put the herbs over here, and you got to do this, and it's like this unbelievably hilarious. It's in Leviticus. It's like a 50-step process, in order to be healed of leprosy. And he's telling a person who's been healed of leprosy to go tell the priest, hey, I'm here to do my job, do what you require of me. We don't get it.
Right.
But at the time, that's fucking hilarious. I mean, that's a good joke,
And it was written down in the Bible by whoever wrote Matthew, which probably was not someone named Matthew.
No, not someone named Matthew, but somebody who got the joke.
Got the joke and was relaying the joke.
Who wrote this like hilarious set piece, in the Gospels, which is completely lost to us.
That's a great example. Any other examples like that that you can think of, either from the Bible or other religious texts?
Well, I mean, there's, particularly when you're talking about some of the great Hindu texts, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, you have these sort of dramas that are being played out that have become scripture in a way. And these dramas have these very complex characters and, men and women and doing stupid things in order to love someone or to get someone's love, things that would work very well in like your basic Amazon comedy series, Maybe not on NBC or ABC. It wouldn't really make any sense on network.
But Showtime.
But Showtime
Right.
or Amazon, like a 30-minute comedy, by which I mean a comedy that's not all that funny. This stuff would fit in perfectly,
Interesting. In your book, Zealot, you look at Jesus, the man, not necessarily the divine creature that some believe he is, and you've already touched on this a little bit, thinking of him as a human, and maybe not all these other things. He would have got up and had breakfast and had this job, and any sense of, again, the sense of what the sense of humor would have been like during that time for him or any other real historical religious figure?
Yeah, so it's funny because what has really survived is the Roman mockery of the Jews and the early Christians.
Right.
That's the stuff that has actually survived. Not a lot of like Jewish humor from the time that has survived, because again, Jesus was a Jew, his followers were Jews, he was preaching Judaism. There's no such thing as Christianity,
right.
For Jesus. But what is really hilarious, though, is that we have all this material, these Roman comics who would make fun of Jesus, not Jesus himself, but the Jesuses,
right.
and etc. There's sort of the caricature of the sort of the rambling Jewish wandering miracle worker yelling, "I am God," or maybe I came from God, or maybe God sent me. But in any case, I'm here to destroy, the greatest empire that ever lived. Again, that's the humor of it, right? So the Romans are literally the greatest empire the world had ever seen. The Jews were the flea on the back of a dog. Like, that's how irrelevant and inconsequential they were. When you read the Bible, the Jews are the center of the earth, right? They're barely even mentioned by the empires of the time. Now, what's remarkable is the Jews will say, yeah, they're gone and we're here still, which is true.
1 point Jews.
Yeah, 1 point Jews, yeah. But for the Romans, they would hear this stuff from the Jews, and it was the funniest shit they'd ever heard in their lives. Like
insane.
you like stone throwing backwards savages. What are you talking about? You are nothing. You are no one. And so, these messiahs who would promise liberation from Rome and the destruction of the emperor, was just perfect material for Roman comedians.
That's actually a great segue into, I wanted to know, which religions seem to have the best sense of humor about themselves?
Oh, probably the Jews.
Jews,
yeah,
right?
For sure,
Jews are good with making
look,
fun of themselves.
Man, it's been a tough 5,000 years. I mean, if you can't laugh about it, you gotta be able to laugh about that. But here's the truth of the matter is, like, when it comes to religion and humor, it's the same rules that apply to, your sister in humor. You can make fun of your sister all you want to, but no one else can, right? Anybody else makes fun of your sister, you punch them in the face.
Right.
But you can say whatever you want. And I think that's the thing, is that, like, Christians make fun of Christianity, and Jews make fun of Judaism, and Muslims make fun of Islam. I mean, we have great comedians in all of these traditions. It's when the Christian makes fun of Islam, or when the Muslim makes fun of Jews, or that's when people are like, that's my sister.
Right. It does seem, again, this is the world we deal with at Funny or Offensive, is about those lines, and much more than any sister joke, religion is what lights our page on fire.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? More than jokes about race, gender, weight, disability, religion, more than anything?
It's actually pretty simple, but it's not what you think it is. It's because people think that religion is about beliefs and practices. That just seems natural and logical, right? Like, religion is about things that you believe and, like, rituals that you perform. No, it's not. Religion is a matter of identity. 71% of Christians in the United States call themselves, 71% of Americans, I should say, 71% of Americans call themselves Christian. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. Really?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's ridiculous.
Not in practice, for sure. Right.
No. 7 out of 10 Americans couldn't tell you anything about Jesus at all, except that he was born in a manger and died on a cross, because that's Easter and Christmas, and that's pretty much all they know. When they say, I'm a Christian, they're making a statement of identity. And as an identity statement, that is wrapped up in everything that you are. Your politics, your social views, your gender, your sexual orientation, your race, your ethnicity, all of that is wrapped up in who you are as a human being. And religion is the most sort of direct line to that identity. And so it's the quickest, most obvious, and most, I think, emotional way to tap into a person's sense of self. So when you're making fun of that person's religion, you are making fun of that person's sense of self, right, who they are in the world, how they understand themselves. Weight comes and goes, right. Race is a construct. Right.
And like you say, it implies all of these other areas. It can actually hit four
everything.
Birds with one stone.
Exactly. It's all of it.
Speaking of emotional birds, cartoons of Muhammad, Charlie Hebdo, South Park Muhammad episode. Why, obviously it's in the religion to not depict the prophet especially.
It's not in the religion.
It's not.
No,
Okay, can you clarify? Can you clarify? Because I think that's a lot of people feel like.
Right. So Islam, like Judaism, is an iconoclastic religion. The belief is that you are not allowed to anthropomorphize God. And if you anthropomorphize God, you are limiting God in some way. So the opposite of Christianity, in which God is literally a guy, literally a man, not kind of a man, or think of him as a man, literally a person.
He's a guy.
Yeah. And so because of that, in both of those traditions, there is an eschewing of physical representations of God. So you will never see, in a synagogue, a picture of God or a painting of a God, or in a mosque. Now, what has happened in both of those traditions is that has then led to just a kind of a blanket prohibition of physical depictions of any prophet, so whether it's Adam or Jesus or Abraham or Moses or anyone, because the fear being that if you do that, then you might start to worship that person, that thing. But it's not in the Quran. It's not part of Islamic law. It's just a tradition. It's a fairly well established tradition. That said, there are thousands and thousands of images of the Prophet Muhammad throughout Islamic history. Some of them are gorgeous. Some of them he's veiled. Some of them he's got fire around him. Some of them he's just in his face, as who he is. So it's much more complicated than that. But here's the thing. I think in the sort of Western imagination, the crime, if you will, is the depiction of Muhammad.
Right.
But that's not the issue, because again, there are thousands and thousands of depictions of the Prophet Muhammad over the last 1,500 years, and many of them have caused no problem whatsoever. It's how
the intent.
Prophet is depicted. So you brought up South Park and you brought up Charlie Hebdo. Right. Now here's the difference between the two, is that South Park actually, in making fun of the whole thing, did it with an enormous amount of respect. The Prophet Muhammad was a superhero.
Right.
He was like this like superhero guy. So like if you're a Muslim, not if you're like some crazy like conservative jihadist, but if you're just like a mainstream Muslim, you watch South Park and you laughed. You thought that's funny and that's good and that's great. Charlie Hebdo, despite the sort of paragon of free speech that it has become since the tragic shooting, is a racist magazine that peddles in blunt racism. Its purpose isn't to make some very interesting political commentary by drawing Muhammad. It's to further disenfranchise that 7 to 12% of the French population that has been shat upon by the state for generations. And it's essentially to make a very clear argument. You either accept this or you're not French and get the fuck out. And that's in no way to, in the slightest way, justify the violence that occurred as a result. But they don't belong in the same category.
Right. And of course, what you've just discussed was completely lost on most of the world.
Of course it was.
Right, because everyone was rallying in support of this group.
Interestingly, it was not lost on the French.
Right.
Because no one in America had heard of Charlie Hebdo.
Right.
Before
but everybody would change their Facebook photos.
Yeah.
Right.
But in France, you see it all the time and you ignore it. It's the equivalent of the National Enquirer. You see the National Enquirer, you look at the cover and you're like, what a piece of shit this thing is, and then you move on.
And you know what it is. You know what you're dealing with. But the rest of the world, you didn't know these were just these incredible satirical martyrs.
Right, exactly.
So that's interesting how you brought up South Park in an admirable way, and you spoke of that with affection. And I think that there's something to be said for finding humor in those things and not having it be debilitating to your beliefs, right? Like, but you brought up Mormonism as well. So Book of Mormon is an incredible example of here's this highly provocative thing about a belief system for a large number of people. And I know Mormons who've gone to the show and loved it.
Yeah, and here's the thing, right? It's that it's about humor when it's at the expense of the marginalized and disenfranchised is not funny. It's as simple as that. You know, people are like, well, how come you can make fun of Christians then? Because we're mostly Christians and we own everything. That's why, you know. When Christians run the government and enterprise and the entire country, you can make fun of them. Right. It's all right. But when you are making fun of a disenfranchised or marginalized group, that's not funny. That's just bullying. If the Book of Mormon had come out 70 years ago, I think I would have a much different response to it than today, when Mormonism is a deeply established, very well run, growing, global religion, you know, on strong footing, right? Then it's like, okay, now we can make fun of it because it's not disenfranchised, it's not marginalized in a way. I think that's really the dividing line for me about what is offensive and what is not offensive.
Seems that some of the harshest comedy is not actually between religions, but between believers and non-believers. Mm-hmm. You've obviously spent some time with Bill Maher. Mm-hmm. We like big fans of Bill Maher. I've never seen a dog with a bone as much as Bill Maher and anti-religion. Where do you think that sort of tenaciousness for a lot of atheists comes from when dealing with people of faith?
First of all, let me fix the a lot of atheists part, because we now actually have data on this. So Bill Maher, I've written a lot about this. He's quite open about it. He's not an atheist. He's an anti-theist. And the difference between an atheist and an anti-theist is an atheist doesn't believe in God. An anti-theist believes that religion is an insidious evil. It's an irrational force in society, and it needs to be removed forcibly if necessary. That's what Bill Maher is. That's what Sam Harris is. That's what Richard Dawkins is. And these guys are on TV. They make a lot of noise, but they're extremists. And for, I think, many, many years, a lot of American atheism was defined by these groups. Then we started doing research and studies and surveys on American atheism because it is growing at a very rapid pace in the United States. And what we discovered was only about 15% of self-described atheists in America ascribe to anti-theism. So they are actually the minority voice. And I can't tell you how many atheists I have met who say, I don't believe in God, but I'm not an asshole. You know, like I don't have to be a dick about it. You know, like I don't believe in God. End of story. You know, you believe in God, go for it. So I think that's the issue. And for Maher, as well as for these other anti-theists, because they believe that faith is the product of an irrational mind, their sort of making fun of it comes from that position, right? So it's the equivalent of making fun of a disabled person. Now, because that's what they think. They think that if you believe in God, there's something wrong with your brain, okay? Right. You're an idiot. And so I'm going to make fun of you as an idiot, as you being an idiot. And so that's why I say it's the equivalent of making fun of, you know, for them, it's the equivalent of making fun of like a disabled person, you know. So, you know, I think that's the issue. That's the issue for them in a lot of ways.
So he and company, they're the extremists of that side. They're the jihadists of.
They're the extremists who appear to be speaking for the majority, but who are not.
Right.
Yeah.
And in having such a strong belief that there is no God and there should be no religion, isn't that just another kind of faith? Isn't there faith in
anti-theism is a religion. It's
right.
It's
another kind of faith, right?
Yeah.
It's having a strong held belief in something. He can't prove there is no God, right?
The academic definition of fundamentalism is adherence to what you believe is absolute truth and a refusal to acknowledge the possibility of counter-truths.
Yes.
I don't care if you call truth scientific, whatever, call it whatever you want. If you refuse to acknowledge the possibility of counter-truth,
right.
You're a fundamentalist.
So we're at this point in time now where freedom of speech, political correctness, hate speech, all of this stuff is swirling in our culture. A lot of it intersects with humor and religion.
Yeah.
A lot of people would say that Donald Trump is a direct result of political correctness and people rebelling against that notion of being policed about how they should speak. Where do you see this going?
First of all, this whole like political correctness thing is utter bullshit. Okay, so it's not politically correct to think that, I don't know, maybe black people shouldn't be shot by white cops all the time. It's not politically correct to think that maybe women should make the same amount of money for the same work as men do. Okay? Political correctness is something assholes say in order to excuse racism, in order to excuse sexism. Okay? Beyond that, I do think that when it comes to sort of what is and what isn't funny, I just keep going back to this old trope again, which is that it's not funny to make fun of people who are already down. That's not funny to me, no matter what the joke is. It's not funny to make fun of the disenfranchised. And unless you're one of the disenfranchised,
right? Then you can.
Then you can. Then it's the sister rule again,
right?
And I think it's not, for me. It's not that complicated. It really isn't. My friend Kamal Bell has this whole thing where he's like, people want humor to be spontaneous, but it's not spontaneous. It takes actually an enormous amount of work. Right. It's like I actually work very hard on these jokes. I didn't just come up with them while I was on stage, And so I think that as a result of that it's just a matter of figuring out how you want to respond to the groups that you're making fun of. I think you should be able to make fun of anyone that you want to, as long as you recognize that if you are building upon, say, stereotypes, or if you are continuing to kick, groups that are already down, then you're in this kind of murky middle where I think a lot of people would find that offensive. And if you don't give a shit about that, fine, make fun of them. It's a thing. But if you do, it's not politically correct to think to yourself, maybe I shouldn't be a dick. Maybe I can be funny without being a dick.
Right. It's not really, there's nothing political about it. It's not political correctness, it's just correctness.
It's right, exactly, yeah.
Some comedians we've spoken to have talked about not going near Islam in their stand-up. They just said it's not worth it. There's a lot of conversation in the creative community about not worth the risk. I'll go and do the most horrific Jesus joke you could ever imagine because I know I can walk home through the roughest Christian neighborhood on the way home and I'm not going to have an issue. So there's a sense that this looming shadow, and again it comes from fundamentalists, that it's risky to make these jokes. So have they actually succeeded in their mission to make it taboo to make jokes?
I think it's fucking racism. That's what I think. I think it's bullshit and it's racism. Nobody is going to get shot going home, from, the Laugh Factory, through West Hollywood, in order to get home after a comedy show where they made, some joke about Muhammad. The fact that you think you're going to is racist behavior. It's racist thinking. Don't make that joke in Qatar, okay? Don't make that joke in Doha, and you'll be fine, okay?
Right, but you look at a public figure like Matt and Trey for South Park. They didn't they receive some death threats over their episode?
They received death threats for the R. Kelly episode.
Right.
I mean,
R. Kelly has a big fan base. They're very extreme.
What I'm saying is, two things. Number one, it is true that there are extremists in the Islamic world who have responded to violence to perceived slights. Right. That's true. It's also true that if you are saying to yourself, I'm just going to assume that every Muslim who hears a joke about Muhammad is going to kill me, and so I'm not going to make any jokes about it, is not just self-censorship, it's racism.
Right.
I have file folders of death threats. Right. Okay? I have like color-coded file folders of death threats. I've had undercover plainclothes police officers have to follow me around, like shadow my home and sit in my classrooms pretending to be students to keep me from, getting killed. And you know who my biggest threats come from? Radical atheists. Those are the ones who threaten me the most.
Really?
And also Christians. A lot of Christians saying that they'll shoot me or they'll kill me or
What-
whatever.
what's the-
Lately Hindus. Lately a lot of Hindus.
Because of the show?
Because of the show.
Yeah.
Some Muslims
Right.
too.
Well, that's nice.
You know, yeah.
You get a well-rounded group of
Yeah.
death threats.
But I guess what I'm saying is this: is that, you know, that kind of self-censorship, there's no place for it in a free society. I mean, you need to stand up. Like, you know, I'm not going to stop, you know, making critical comments about Islamic or Hindu or Christian, you know, or even atheistic practices because I get death threats from them. And I think, so in general, that's just a bad idea. But I do think that for a lot of people, Stephen Colbert is hilarious on this point. He does a great job about it, where, like, you know, he goes out of his way to never mention Muhammad, but he does so in a very public way.
Right.
You know,
So he gets to have his cake and eat it too.
Exactly.
By not making the jokes.
And
so-
that's what he's doing. He is sort of making a meta criticism about the inherent racism involved in thinking to yourself that, you know, the guy at the 7-Eleven is going to shoot me. Because, you know, I made this joke. That is not to say that violence doesn't happen. It does happen. It ain't gonna happen here, you know. It's not gonna happen at the Laugh Factory, okay? You're fine.
Yeah.
You know, Matt and Trey did what you're supposed to do. They laughed it off, and then they went on and made fun of the next person. That's what you're supposed to do.
Thank you so much for your time, Reza
I appreciate
Aslan.
it. Thank
Fantastic.
you. Thank you very much.